Hello, readers, and welcome to Shelf Help. Born of Blood and Ash was released, and I was wrong. Okay, I didn't completely whiff, so half point. Poppy is Satoria, and the second daughter, like the ultimate second daughter. Despite, and in fact because, the series keeps insisting otherwise, Sierra is the first daughter, and Niktos is her once-promised king. I suspected that Ethos had shared his plan with Holland and had the Fate pulling strings behind the scene. Now I'm sure of it. That Fate is 100% playing Puppet Master. I did, however, misjudge the Fates as a whole. I assumed they were acting in concert to build a new ancient through Poppy, to restore the balance, call us upset, while putting themselves back in charge. I gave them far too much benevolence credit, because yikes. At least some of them are trying to unbalance the world enough to wake the other ancients and do a little light genocide. Holland may very well be going rogue here to save the world. What I did get completely wrong is the importance of birth order. I assumed it was set dressing, just the way the world worked, much like the seasons in A Song of Fire and Ice. It is in fact fundamental to who Poppy is and why she is so important. Now we return to the world of Blood and Ash, with the second half of A Shadow in the Ember. After brutally murdering her own stepbrother, as he richly deserves, Sierra decides to turn her fury on the Primal of Death. She kinda has a death wish. Or at least she always assumed she would die, so I fear it. And he did kinda gloss over the fact he was the Primal of Death she was promised to. Ash basically tells her to suck it up, because if he leaves her, other gods will come looking, because ripping open the realms and doing a regicide might be considered making an undue scene. And like the dark prince that he is, he places her on his mighty steed, takes her to his castle of Shadowstone, guarded by dragons, with people crucified on the walls. Okay, they're Draken, not dragon, and the people are gods, and he didn't put them there. Though he skips over that important detail for a hot minute. Ash is actually very bad at sharing information. Like, seriously bad. It is a consistent character flaw. With blood on her bare feet and whip marks on her back and dressed in nothing but a night rail and Ash's cloak, she meets Ash's merry band of misfits. The Shadow Court is made up of outcasts and escapees from other courts, or those smuggled out of Dalos and Colos's tender, loving care. It is important to note here that there are no gods of death in the Court of Death. Pen that. Coming off the main series, the names are probably familiar. Not only are they the supposed gods of Poppy's time, their names are also used in locations. We also learn that Ash, like his granddaughter, can taste emotions. Once we've settled into our new setting, the story starts drip-feeding information. It's because I did not make the deal. I was not the Primal of Death then. My father was. He made the deal with Roderick Muriel. It was he who demanded the first female of the bloodline as a consort. Ash has been kept in the dark about the deal. His father died loving his mother, so he has no idea why his father would ask for a mortal consort of all things. Not telling him could be a free will, non-interference thing, because, telling him 200 years in advance that he has to love this stranger will make it really hard to love her. But Occam's razor is probably what he doesn't know can't be tortured out of him. And when you're playing the world's highest stakes game of keep away, Sometimes you have to roll the dice and hope the fates have your back. Here's the thing about the true primal of life. They are, in fact, all-knowing, and they have foresight. In Born of Blood and Ash, we see Sierra begin to get a handle on her new powers. She can look at a person or an object and just know everything. Nectis says Ethos could just think about something and eventually the answer would come to him. There are exceptions, but the important one is that the primal of life can't see things that affect them personally. This is important to remember to anything related to the deal, which means Ethos foresaw his own death, or at least he knew he would not be around to see the prophecy fulfilled. The next bit actually won't come up for a while, since we're going through these in chronological instead of recommended order. In the proper reading order, Shadow comes between Crown and War, where we learn a lot more about Elizabeth, including that she's a Demies. It's forbidden to ascend them. They would become what we call Demies, a being with godlike powers that was never meant to carry such a gift, a burden. They are something else. According to visions, mortal firstborn sons and daughters can't be ascended, or they become Demies. Sierra is an exception to the rule, because she is the first daughter and carries the embers of life. Millie, sadly, was not an exception. But this is why the Solace Ascended used the firstborns for breeding. Suffice to say, Atlantia could have thrown a wrench in Elizabeth's schemes by convincing the mortals that polycules and free love communes were the way to go. Moving on, we run hard into something that just personally annoys me, regardless of genre. Ash lays down rules he fails to explain. It's always a setup for the plucky protagonist to ignore unexplained rules and get into trouble, which Sierra immediately does. We get a rapid-fire series of events that are all important later. Gemma, a mortal girl, is reported missing. Vessus, primal of those who should die in a fire, makes her first known to Sierra visit. Sierra breaks 2 rules at once by not staying hidden and going into the redwoods to save a hawk. Hawks are getting a count, by the way. We'll get back to them and what they mean for Mr. Denier later. Right after she uses her gift to save the hawk, Gyrims show up again, smelling of stale lilacs. Yeah, they weren't after Ash. She gets hurt and Ash has to save her and finally explains his rules at volume, which he could have done calmly earlier, like an adult. Recognizing that Sierra is in a new place and didn't know that the blood trees grow where gods are entombed as punishment, which is an important bit of info. When Sierra gets measured for new clothes, she learns something is happening to the Chosen. Sierra has been taught her whole life that the Chosen are ascended to serve the gods. No Chosen has been ascended in several hundred years. From the moment Chosen arrive in Elysium, they are treated as an object to be used and given away, toyed with, and eventually broken. Of course, upon reread, we know Callis can't ascend anyone. At least not as they should be. And bless Sierra, she is ready to burn the whole system down. I can appreciate that feeling. But the rite is old, predating Kalos. It probably goes back to the first mortals. Only relatively recently have things changed. There's a point later in Light in the Flame, I think, where Ash points out to Sierra that the rite is actually important, because gods and primals need people around who remember what it was like to be mortal. Because when a Chosen is ascended by the true primal of life, they become a god. pin that. Which is probably how Atlantia got started. All those chosen still around when Syrah and Ash put Collis in the ground are going to be ascended into gods, but not want to be part of any court because of Collis. So they get their own place, still in Elysium, but not part of any court. From blood and ash, we will rise. Or more precisely, from the one born of blood and ash, we ascend. The next milestone is when Syrah brings Gemma, a mortal, back to life, completing part of the prophecy and giving us our first Lilacs count. And Ash promptly threatens everyone with eternal damnation if they say a word. And he can do it, too. He also partly realizes what Ethos did, having Syrah carry the embers of life. Because the kind of power I just felt now, many would see it as a threat. You are incredibly lucky, Lycia. Pretty sure having a literal fate as your guard does not count as luck. On page 404 we get another story account, and our first confirmation that it was true, and not just a legend. Collis was distraught, somehow heartbroken. He called for his brother, summoning Ethos to the mortal realm. He begged Ethos to give Satoria life, an act Ethos could and had done in the past. But my father had rules that governed when he granted life. One of them was that he would not take a soul from the veil. It was wrong, forbidden to both him and Collis. The inciting incident. Upon reread, we know the Fates saw this coming, planned on it. One of them gave Collis the star, after all. Also, I bet good money Collis was stalking her and had been for a while. Poor girl Jump. We are told the Fates can't see the future. That said, this book ends with Holland showing Syrah and Ash the strings of fate and explaining how choices change people's strings. We'll get to that bit of manipulation in a minute. But Ethos made a choice here, an important one. At some point, Ethos made the choice to revive a mortal for the first time. In doing so, he created the expectation in Collis that it was possible. Not a big deal at the time, but pen this. Butterfly flapped its wings and created a hurricane. The star was created a long time ago, back when there were still dragons. We don't know yet who did it or why. One of the Fates followed the strings that grew from that single choice and saw what could happen. Maybe their original intentions were good. Having a place to store primal embers so shit doesn't go boom would certainly fall under keeping the balance. Yet it feels like not all of them saw it that way. Back to the story. They all adjourn to the war room to chat, covering most of what we already know about the deal and Satoria, though they haven't put two and two together yet. We also learn that Collis is keeping Ethos' soul prisoner, which will come back later, in the creepiest of ways. And then everything falls apart, as Ash realizes what Syrah was trained to do, and I'm so glad to see this seduce and kill plot hit the curb. It was getting a bit redundant for my taste. Syrah has crushing guilt, and Ash is big mad, which, fair. Though he's more mad that she would throw away her life than try to kill him. But that leads to my least favorite plot point in a bit. So for now, to war! The Shadowlands are come under attack by Dakas. Dakas are vicious, flesh-eating creatures rumored to be birthed from bottomless pits. Featureless, except for a mouth full of teeth and a slit for a nose, they are drawn to ether. Collis treats them as pets. And for the life of me, I always picture them as Shadow Beast from Twilight Princess. This is actually a wonderful battle scene with cavalry charges and sunken ships and general dismemberment and monsters punching holes in stone so they can climb a battlement and fire in the skies as dragons fight overhead. In this battle of gods and monsters, a mortal vessel of very valuable embers really should be literally anywhere else. But where's the fun in that? There is a point where she throws a dagger, but it's not aimed at the heart or doing it blind, so I'm not counting it. And when the dakas burn, they smell like stale lilacs, which I am counting. Which makes me wonder if they are another of Colossus' creations, or something he found. In the aftermath, Ash takes Sierra's Shadowstone dagger in the most unnecessarily sexy way possible. Even the other characters are wondering if they should leave the room. And then he is unnecessarily antagonistic to a woman who just risked her life in battle for his people and saved some lives. It's not like she ever had a choice in what she was raised to do. Which she says as much, but he's going to be an ass about it for a while. And we're going to fade to black for a bit, because this isn't that kind of review. And pick up when Ash drops a hint. You can never weaken me to the point that you'd even be a real threat. Which Sierra takes to mean he'd never love her, but it's dumber than that. A few paragraphs later, in a moment of impulsive recklessness, Sierra gives her own butterfly wings a flap and bites Ash hard enough to take a single drop of blood. I just imagine Holland looking at that string and putting his head in his hands. He probably expected her to get hurt and Ash helpfully heal her, and oops, embers ignited. I wonder if the Fates were making bets and anyone had light BDSM on their bingo card. But yes, in a mirror of Ash taking a drop of Sierra's blood and being able to feel her deep emotions, Sierra takes a single drop of primal blood and the embers spark to life, which kickstarts her culling and sends her into ascension. We've reached the climax of this book, and things fall out pretty quickly at this point. And Ash learns that disarming a mortal who is very suddenly the fixation of the single most powerful character in the series may have been a bit of a bad idea. Especially since she's not actually a threat to him, nor does she want to be. But this does lead to two more wings out moments for Ash. First is when Sierra is attacked by one of the former Chosen while bathing, who is afraid she'll bring Colossus down on them. Not that they get to ask, because Hector, who absolutely must be Emil's ancestor, destroys him, soul and all. Sierra gets a culling headache, and Ash brings her tea just like Holland made for her, and Nektos tells her she smells like death, just like Kieran tells Poppy. And after coming to her rescue in a fury, worrying about if she's injured, taken care of, and being concerned when she's in pain, Ash does a complete 180 and says they can't even be friends because he can never trust her. It sends her into a full depression episode. I seriously hate this part of the book. It gives me whiplash. And Ash is just being a jackass. Eos and Belle take Sierra to speak to Gemma, and we learn Colossus is searching for his Gracia. In the primal language, it means life, love, but can also mean obsession. And Colossus is Satoria. Gemma spoke, drawing me back to her. I didn't think that Garcia was a person. He never spoke of it as if it were something living and breathing. He talked as if it were an object, a possession that belonged to him. And that sums up Colossus. He's the man women look at and decide to take their chances with the bear. It's also what makes him so terrifying as a villain. He is born to privilege, one of the most powerful beings in the world. Other people, mortals, and gods, even if they are his twin or nephew, are just obstacles in his path to greater glory. Even the girl he supposedly loves is just a thing to be possessed, a collectible for his shelf, to be taken out and played with at his leisure, and then ignored again. This isn't even dark romance, or even one-sided feelings. He's a narcissist with dreams of grandeur, who would rather see the world burn and rule over the ashes than be anything less than all-powerful, all-loved, and all-feared. Gemma also talks about the Chosen who disappeared and come back changed with black eyes and only moving around at night. And how Collis just thinks he needs his Gracia to complete them. He doesn't know at this point that Satoria and the Embers are a package deal. So he's actually talking about Satoria here. How he thinks she will help is a mystery. But even with the new information from Born of Blood and Ash, I'm not sure how that would work. There's a quick discussion of if the Fates know what Ethos did, and with the interesting tidbit that Primals can't touch the Fates.
What do you say, Cusco?
Whoa, no touchy. No touchy. No touch.
Pin that. Belle laughed. The Primals cannot make demands of the Ari. They cannot even touch the Ari. It's forbidden to keep the balance. It wouldn't cross Nyxos's mind. I doubt it would have even crossed Collis's, and he usually has no care for the rules whatsoever. The Fates only answer to the true primal of life. So I wonder if this no touchy rule applies to them. Not that Syrah could enforce it at this point. She does worry later about how often she kicked Holland. And then everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Our baby-killing gods are back, and they work for Collis, and they want the Gracia. Belle takes a Shadowstone dagger to the back, Eos is hit with a blast of ether, and Siri takes a knockout blow to the head. She wakes up and fights a god whose special talent is mind grape, which certainly gives Syrah deep feelings, and God, I love this moment. The floor was vibrating. I watched the darkness gather in the alcoves and peel away from the walls, racing across the floor to the entryway. A blast of thunder shook the entire palace. No, that wasn't thunder. It was a roar. A draken. Nyxos. The churning mass of shadow appeared in the archway of the chamber, and what I saw looked nothing like the Nyxos I knew. His skin was the color of midnight, streaked with silver of ether, as hard as the stone of the palace it had been built from, and just as smooth. The flesh swirled all over, making it difficult to see if his features were the same. The twin sweeping arcs behind him were no longer wings of smoke and shadow, but solid and similar to those of a draken, except his were a seething mass of silver and black. Power sparked from his eyes filled with so much ether, no irises or pupils were visible. Nyxos rose into the air, wings stretched wide, arms at his side, hands open, ether dancing across his palms. "On your knees," he commanded. "Now." He seems a wee bit upset for someone who can't even be her friend. The baby killers get turned into ash, and Mr. Mindgrape gets his eyes melted out, his body carved open, and heart ripped out by Nyxos's bare hands. A completely normal, rational, and measured response to the Embers being threatened. Nothing to do with Syrah as a person at all. But with that burst of violence past, we get a very important moment. Syrah ascends Belle, completing yet another part of the prophecy. She isn't a primal yet, because there can only be one primal for each court, but she could now challenge Hannon for his court. In From Blood and Ash, Poppy takes a moment to look at a fresco of the gods on the ceiling in Macedonia Castle. She notes that there's only one primal, Niktos, the primal of life and death. Everyone else, including Belle, is called a god. In A Soul of Ash and Blood, the same scene from Castile's point of view, he says the same. At the end of War of Two Queens, Niktos tells Poppy, Castile, and Kieran that after the gods went to sleep, people started referring to Niktos as the primal of life and death. So someone messed with history. And honestly, the space between when the gods went to sleep and Poppy being born is some really murky shit. With lots of people, including Malik and Castile's parents, doing things that are really inconsistent. Collis and Callum are probably to blame for Isabeth, but I'm thinking other people are lying too. But I'll get back to that. Maybe by the time I get that far, it will all be clear. Anyway, Bella's ascended and nothing happens. No attack, no Dakas, no messenger for Niktos to shoot. So Niktos calls for the Ari. They don't have to answer, but of course, Holland does. 20 years is less than the blink of an eye for someone who may very well have seen the dawn of life on this planet, but he's clearly fond of Syrah. He also seems to have feelings for Penelope, goddess of divination Poppy was named after. But combined with the fact that primals can't touch fates, that looks like a tragic love story. Wouldn't that be a thing? Twist the world into a pretzel to build a brand new primal who can change reality itself just so he can do more than hold his girlfriend's hand. This entire scene is very interesting, full of what is said, unsaid, and implied. Holland is walking a finer line here than he was playing guard. I think I might know, Niktos said, drawing my gaze. He was watching Holland as if he were a few minutes away from pitching him through the open ceiling. The nursemaid was right. The Ari had been present at her birth. And you, being one of the Ari, learned of the deal somehow, and took the place of the one who was supposed to train her. He paused. To kill me. To kill, Holland corrected. I'm guessing at this moment it's a good thing Niktos can't touch him, because otherwise Holland would be extra special dead. But he's untouchable, so he gets to sass death. And this is the sort of distinction I like. Holland just ignores the context of his job. What Syrah, her mother, and everyone believed she was being trained for is actually irrelevant to the training itself. Remember how the only scene we get with Syrah and Holland alone are blindfolded dagger throws, and she has to hit the heart. But if you have to seduce someone to the point they love you and trust you, you're definitely close enough to just stab them. Throwing the dagger is unnecessary, especially blind. But because if Holland didn't step in, someone would have trained her regardless, it's not interference, in his view, or by whatever fine print binds the Ari. The fact he preloaded her with a different set of skills than she otherwise would have been taught apparently doesn't matter. You are not allowed to intervene in fate. He didn't. The goddess smiled, and Niktos shot her an incredulous look. Not technically, she amended. I never directly interfered, Holland said, and I really needed to stop thinking of him as a knight when he was basically a god. Technicalities and direct intervention. So if, say, just as an example, a guard had been paid off to kill Sira in her sleep, and Holland, as a knight, suggested to a maid that a certain door should be locked for security reasons, forcing the guard to take a different route or hunt down a key, giving Sira just enough time to wake up and foil the plot. He's not actually stopping the guard or forcing the maid to lock the door. He didn't change anyone's intentions or fate. Or, and perhaps more salient, if he knew a certain man getting drunk would cause a bar fight that spilled into the streets and get Ezra's girlfriend killed, leading to a chain of events where Ash picks up his bride, it's not technically direct interference to buy the man a drink. Or 4. I did it because I knew I needed to. It wasn't easy, being gone for so long and so often, but this was bigger than me, bigger than all of us. Holland leaned against the pillar and lifted his gaze to Niktos. I did it because I knew your father. I knew him when he was true primal of life. I considered him a friend. I glanced at Niktos, but nothing could be gained from his expression. Did you know what would become of him? He asked. Holland shook his head. No, the Ari cannot see the fate of a risen primal. Grief crept into his voice. If I could have, I don't know if I would still be sitting here today. I don't think I could have sat by and done nothing. The Ari can easily be viewed as alien, and in a way they are. They are untouchable except in very particular situations, and have obscure rules about how they interact with the world, rules we the readers aren't privy to. But this moment makes Holland very human, for lack of a better word. He had an I'd die for you level friendship with Ethos, one that could have gone back millennia. With the release of Born of Blood and Ash, I feel this is one of those lines that means so much upon reread. Ethos foresaw this, all of it. We have also yet to see more than one fate at a time. When Sira summons them, she only gets Holland or Aiden, who we'll get back to. We also have learned that the fates are not a hive mind and disagree with each other. Some disagreed with Holland's choice to protect Sira, though they did not or could not stop him. When it says Ethos consulted the fates, it seems likely he consulted just Holland, who was his friend, who risked a lot to watch over Satoria, Sira, and the Embers of Life. Ethos didn't dump the Embers and Satoria into the Muriel bloodline and say so long and thanks for all the fish. He knew exactly what he was doing. The Ari can do nothing to intervene in your fate, Penelope advised. Not anymore. This is kind of a weird line, acknowledging that Holland did intervene on her behalf, even if never directly. But now he cannot even intervene indirectly. At this point, Sira is considered a risen primal, even though the Embers ignited not quite 2 days ago. This is the part where we get into Holland's leading questions and doublespeak. Even if Ethos sat down and laid out the whole plan, Holland saying, "Here's what you two need to do," would be direct intervention. So he gives them hints. Niktos asks why his father put the Embers in a mortal bloodline, and Holland points out he should be asking, what did his father do? Then proceeds as if Niktos did ask the right question. As you know, your father was the true primal of life. Collis couldn't take everything. That would be impossible. Embers of life still remained in Ethos, just as embers of death remaining callus. And when you were conceived, part of that ember passed into you. Just a flicker of power, not as strong as the embers that remained in your father, but enough. Enough for what, Holland? Enough for him to be blood and bone? A true primal of life? Dare I say, a once-promised king? Niktos barely acknowledges the fact he was born blood and bone, but does catch that Ethos did it to keep him safe. Because Callus is definitely not above infanticide. They are told they're heartmates without using the word, and then Niktos asks why his father did it. Again. The question is again sidestepped, this time by Penelope, so she can talk about the prophecy and her vision that went with it. I covered this in my prophecy video, so I won't rehash it here. But she does hedge that she saw more, but nothing she could understand enough to tell. And then Holland gives a lesson in string theory. There is never just one string that charts the course of a life, or how that life will impact the realms. Holland opened his hand, spreading his fingers wide. I gasped at the number of strands appeared, no thicker than a thread and shimmering a bright blue. There are dozens for most lives. Some even have hundreds, if possible, outcomes. You? His gaze lifted to me, and I swallowed. You have had many strings, many different paths, but they all end the same. Your path has always ended in your death before you even saw 21 years of life. Niktos, bless his broken little soul, gets all up on his high horse about this. For a woman he can't even be friends with. And then Holland pours salt on the wound. Death always finds you, one way or another. His focus returned to me. By the hands of a god, or a misinformed mortal, by Callus himself, and even by death. I stilled, my heart lurching. What? Niktos snarled. I love how benign Holland is here. He basically raised Syrah, and telling her she's going to die like it's just the weather. I'd also like to point out his sentence structure here. He names Callus, but not Niktos. Instead, uses death as a proper noun, which makes his first sentence more interesting. It could easily read, Niktos always finds you. And then Penelope draws her attention to one particular thread. She lifted her finger, nearly touching one of the shimmering strands, a thread that appeared to have broken off and into another shorter thread. This was not intentional. What are you talking about? Niktos demands. She has your blood in her, doesn't she? All those threads and you picked that one? How terribly convenient for the conversation you want to have. But it does lead to Holland saying something interesting. So reckless, impulsive, Holland muttered. A laugh choked me. Yeah, well, you've always known it was my greatest flaw. Or greatest strength, Holland countered. Your actions could have given whatever it was Ethos believed upon hearing the prophecy a chance to come to fruition. Now I kinda wonder how specific Ethos's foresight was, or how specific those strings are. Do they know how this drop of blood got in their system? Because that would be awkward. Of course, that one drop of primal blood she ingested has changed her fate, creating a new string. And what is that? It is the unexpected thread. Unpredictable. It is the unknown, the unwritten, Penelope explained. It is the one thing that not even the fates can predict or control. The corners of her lips turned up. It is the only thing that can disrupt fate. And what is that? Niktos asked, hands closing to fists at his side. And how do I find it? It can't be found, she said, and I was seconds away from screaming my frustration. It can only be accepted. You're going to need to give us a little more detail, Niktos snapped. It's love, Holland answered. Love is the one thing not even fate can contend with. Laying it on thick there, guys. I really appreciate the long manipulative lead-up. Oh yeah, the girl I stuck my neck out for walked a super narrow line of keeping her safe without directly interfering, and who knows how many people covered for the fact I've been missing for 2 decades. All that was for absolutely nothing. She's going to die anyway, and in less than 6 months. Oh, and you, Niktos, who has been casually brushing against her this whole conversation? There are good odds you'll be the one to do it, even though she's the other half of your soul, and the whole world will suffer when she kicks it. But look at this, a twist. Something that can save her. Something that can change her fate. Something uber extra powerful. It's that squishy feeling you already have. Now just accept your feelings. No, seriously, they say love can only be accepted over and over again. Like Holland is trying to drop some sort of indirect hint or something. Your body cannot withstand the culling. Not without the sheer will of what is more powerful than fate and even death. Holland looked at Niktos. Not without the love of the one who would aid in her ascension. You're talking about the blood of a god, saying I would need the blood of a god that loves me? I couldn't even believe I was speaking the words. Not just any god. A primal. And not just any primal. Penelope's blue eyes fixed on Niktos. The blood of a primal the embers belong to. That and the pure will of love can unravel fate. I note that death isn't used as a proper noun here. And again, laying it on thick. They do everything here but tell Niktos he's a dumbass. If this were a Disney movie, someone would be singing about following your heart. Boy is ready to rip open both realms until he's told he has to pull up his big boy panties and deal with his own insecurities. And yeah, he did a stupid, and I hate it, and we'll cover that in the next book. Then Holland gives his parting shot. He tells Seraphina she is Satoria reborn, which we know from later books isn't true, and I'm betting Holland knows that too. He can't tell them what to do. If the whole accept your feelings is the carrot, this is the stick. Niktos knows how twisted his uncle is, what he will do to have Satoria back. He definitely knows what Collis does to his favorites. The sort of danger Sierra would be in if Collis gets his hands on her. Having Satoria mixed up in this is a double-edged sword. Collis won't kill her, but there are things worse than death. And Holland points out that she, the first daughter born after the deal, the last of the Muriel bloodline, born with the fire of the gods in her veins, carries the only embers of life. Ash finally cottons on to the fact and declares her queen, the primal of life. Something he probably should have figured out earlier in this conversation, and probably the story. Poor Holland. It must be like watching a rock sing through Jell-O. Join me next time when we start a Light in the Flame and see how these two work through their issues and save the world. Thank you for your time. Let me know how I can improve your shelf.